Welcome everyone, let's start. Jake Thompson always loved exploring. He grew up in a small town surrounded by dense woods and abandoned buildings that fed his curiosity. One summer he discovered Pine Hollow, a secluded area deep in the forest that the locals whispered about but avoided. The stories ranged from ghost sightings to people disappearing. Jake dismissed them as mere legends, eager to uncover the truth. It was a sweltering July afternoon when Jake decided to venture into Pine Hollow. Armed with a flashlight, his phone, and a small backpack of supplies, he set out on the narrow, overgrown path leading to the heart of the forest. As he walked, the trees grew denser, their thick canopy blocking out the sun and casting eerie shadows on the ground. After an hour of hiking, Jake arrived at a dilapidated cabin, the supposed epicenter of the Pine Hollow legends. The cabin was a crumbling relic with broken windows and a sagging roof. It looked as if it had been abandoned for decades. Despite its state, Jake felt a strange pull, a need to go inside and explore. Pushing open the creaky door, Jake stepped into the dark, musty interior. The air was thick with dust and the floor was littered with debris. He swept his flashlight across the room, revealing old furniture covered in white sheets. As he moved deeper into the cabin, he noticed odd symbols etched into the walls, their meanings unclear. Jake's heart raced with a mix of fear and excitement. He was finally inside the legendary Pine Hollow cabin. He pulled out his phone to document the find, snapping pictures of the strange symbols in the decaying interior. As he explored, he found a narrow staircase leading to the basement. Against his better judgment, Jake descended the stairs, each step creaking under his weight. The basement was pitch black, the only light coming from his flashlight. As he reached the bottom, he felt a chill run down his spine. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the air was thick with an oppressive silence. Jake shone his flashlight around the room, revealing rows of shelves lined with dusty jars and old books. In the center of the room was a large wooden table, its surface covered in more of the strange symbols. But what caught Jake's attention was a small, ornate box sitting in the middle of the table. He approached the table, his curiosity getting the better of him. The box was intricately carved with the same symbols that adorned the walls. Jake hesitated for a moment, then lifted the lid. Inside was an old tattered diary. He picked it up, the pages brittle and yellowed with age. As he began to read, Jake realized the diary belonged to a man named Samuel, who had lived in the cabin over a century ago. Samuel wrote about strange occurrences, whispers in the night, cold spots, and the feeling of being watched. He had become obsessed with the symbols, believing they held the key to understanding the dark presence that haunted Pine Hollow. The last entry was particularly disturbing. Samuel wrote about performing a ritual to communicate with the entity. He believed he could control it, but something had gone horribly wrong. The entry ended abruptly, with a single chilling sentence. "It is here. I cannot escape." As Jake read the final words, he heard a faint whispering. He froze, his heart pounding. The whispering grew louder, echoing through the basement. It was coming from all around him, a low, menacing murmur that seemed to seep into his very soul. Panicking, Jake stuffed the diary into his backpack and bolted up the stairs. He stumbled out of the cabin, the whispering still echoing in his ears. He ran through the forest, not stopping until he was back on the main road. Breathing heavily, Jake looked back at the forest, half expecting to see something or someone following him. But there was nothing there, just the dense, silent woods. He shook his head, trying to convince himself it was all in his imagination. Back home, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He tried to focus on other things, but his mind kept drifting back to the diary and the whispers. That night, he had a nightmare. He was back in the basement, the whispering growing louder until it was a deafening roar. He woke up in a cold sweat, the sound still ringing in his ears. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Jake would hear faint whispers in his house, always just out of earshot. Objects moved on their own, and he felt a constant oppressive presence as if he were being watched. He tried to ignore it, but the occurrences grew more frequent and intense. Desperate, Jake turned to the diary, hoping to find some way to stop whatever he had unleashed. As he flipped through the pages, he found a section detailing the ritual Samuel had performed. It mentioned a counter-ritual, a way to banish the entity. Jake knew it was a long shot, but he had to try. Armed with the instructions from the diary, Jake gathered the necessary items and made his way back to Pine Hollow. The forest seemed even darker and more foreboding than before. He reached the cabin and descended into the basement, the air thick with an ominous energy. Following the steps in the diary, Jake set up the ritual. He lit candles, drew symbols on the floor, and began to chant the words written in the diary. As he chanted, the whispering grew louder, filling the room with a deafening roar. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the basement into darkness. Jake felt a cold hand on his shoulder, and he spun around, but there was no one there. The whispering turned into a chilling laughter, echoing through the room. Jake realized too late that he had made a grave mistake. The counter-ritual had only angered the entity. He tried to run, but his feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The laughter grew louder, and he felt a cold, crushing force around him, squeezing the life out of him. As darkness closed in, Jake's last thought was of the diary and the terrible mistake he had made by opening that box. The townsfolk found his body a week later in the basement of the Pine Hollow cabin. His face was frozen in a look of sheer terror, and his body was covered in the strange symbols from the diary. The house on Pine Hollow remained abandoned, the whispers and laughter continuing to echo through the woods. The townspeople spoke of Jake in hushed tones, warning others never to venture into Pine Hollow, where the darkness still lingered, waiting for its next victim.